thanks for being here. It's great to see such a good crowd. For those of you who don't know, I'm Lily Siegel, the Executive Director and Curator here at the Greater Reston Art Center, and I'm going to be in conversation today with Sue Wrbican, our artist on view, artist extraordinaire, I guess would be the appropriate adjective. I just want to do a little housekeeping of the best sort before we get started and thank our supporters of this exhibition. Of course, our board and our staff really deserve credit up front, and Reston Town Center Association, Reston Community Center, and Arts Fairfax, formerly known as the Arts Council of Fairfax County, have stepped up and supported this exhibition from the very beginning, as well as Sue's forthcoming project out in Reston Town Square Park. So Sue is working on a pretty major sculptural installation, which you can see a maquette of in the front next to the title wall. So check that out because you're going to see it in what scale? Probably 200, 300 times that, right outside where the Patrick Doherty used to be. So something to look forward to in May. We also have a few upcoming programs that I want to share with you. Up next, Molly Donovan, the curator of contemporary art from the National Gallery of Art in DC, is going to be here on November 16th, talking about Sue's work and its relationship to surrealism and surrealism in contemporary art. And then once we say goodbye to Sue's show, sadly, we will have another really exciting event here in the empty gallery before we put up our next exhibition. It is the Monster Drawing Rally, which is a fundraising model borrowed from Southern Exposure in San Francisco. Think of it sort of like an Iron Chef for artists. We invite around 60 artists to come and make work here in the gallery that will then be for sale. And they have a constraint of an hour to make as much work as they want. They can use supplies that they bring. We'll have some supplies, and then it will be for sale for $75 a piece. And if multiple people want the same artwork, it is just a draw of cards, and whoever gets the high card gets the honor of purchasing the work. Start your holiday shopping early, build your own collection, and the wonderful thing too is if you don't get a chance to buy your work, you get to meet the artist, and you could just buy your work directly from them out of their studio. So we hope to see many of you there participating as artists. I see some in the audience, and Sue will be participating, and come by and have fun with us. I'm going to read Sue's biography now. So I think Sue probably doesn't need much of an introduction to this audience, but she's an associate professor and director of photography at the School of Art at George Mason University. She has an MFA in photography from the Rhode Island School of Design and a BA in English writing with a concentration in poetry from the University of Pittsburgh. Her studio is in the Monroe Street Arts Walk in the Brookland neighborhood of Washington, D.C. Her site-specific sculpture, The Eventual Outcome of an Instant, was constructed at the Seligman Center in Sugarloaf, New York in 2015. And I guess we just learned is on permanent view in their collection now, so that's really exciting. In 2014, she presented her installation and lecture, Continue the Temporary and It Becomes Forever, at the Zizek Studies Conference at the University of Cincinnati's College of Design, Art, Architecture, and Planning. Her video, Back Roof, is included in artist Miranda July's Joni for Jackie archive at the Getty Research Institute in LA. It's a long bio, there are a lot of accomplishments. Sue has held artist residencies at the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation in Captiva, Florida, Kala Art Institute in Berkeley, California, the Atlantic Center for the Arts in New Smyrna Beach, Florida, and Stud Residency in Catlett, Virginia. She's a founding member of the Floating Lab Collective, whose projects have been exhibited widely in venues such as ZKM in Karlsruhe, Germany, and the Nathan Cummings Foundation in New York. In 2008, she worked with Mary Carruthers on a project addressing gas consumption and the environment entitled The Frozen Car. And as of yesterday, She has a review in the Washington Post for this exhibition, so please make sure to check it out. And let's have a conversation.
All right. Can I just say thank you?
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, like we met each other in the hallway one day, right? And you were like, well, I'd really like to come to your studio. And I was like, sure, come on over. And then boom, amazing. That was really so serendipitous and so much about what happens with my work. So,
Well, I'm honored that you entrusted this project to me, especially with everything that has happened. That baby over there is mine. Sue tolerated
the husband too, right?
Yeah, the husband and the grandfather. But we started talking about this exhibition, and then Sue came over 2 weeks after I gave birth, and we started picking out prints for the exhibition. So
was it on the baby blanket? On
it
the
was. Let's see, I'm going to turn around so I can see everyone. So thank you.
Mutual.
Let's start from the beginning. You started out as a poet.
Yes.
And I think you are still a poet, though that's not really your public persona anymore. Can you talk about poetry and how it's led you to where you are now? That's a big question, so we'll...
Yeah, I think when I started taking classes at University of Pittsburgh, it was funny because I was working as a waitress in Butler County, PA, and I would save my change every week, right? And I would like put it in this jar, and then whatever was in that jar I would take to the bank, and then I'd put it in a savings account. And I was like, okay, this is going to be something someday. And I had already had taken classes at the University of Pittsburgh, but for financial reasons and whatever, I just couldn't do it anymore. And so one day I was like, well, you know, I just really want to go back to school. And I applied, and they were like, well, you owe this much money, and you know, until you pay that off, you're not going to be able to come back. And I was like, okay, well, how much is it? And I think it was like $212 and some cents or something. And I was like, all right. And it turned out that, weirdly enough, that was exactly what was in the bank account. So I was like, cool. And so when the first two classes I took was a class in feminist philosophy, and the other class was a photography class. Okay. And I was taking those at the University of Pittsburgh. And
were those gen ed classes? How?
Who knows? I don't even know. I just kept talking my advisor into letting me take classes, and she would kind of make up my major. I don't know. And then in the meantime, I was really interested in poetry, and I took a poetry class, and the teacher was amazing, and he turned us on to you know, some very, very interesting poets, like Donald Judd and oh gosh, I wish I could remember all the names, Sharon Olds. And so from that point, I started writing poetry, and it was really based on these experiences that I was having, like my life experiences. Mm-hmm. And you know, I decided I was going to major in poetry because I could keep, like my minor was film studies, so I could keep taking the photography classes and like load up with the poetry classes. And I took every teacher at the University of Pittsburgh. I went through all of them because I wanted to really learn and write. And then when it came time to do the MFA, I decided I wanted to do photography, and I applied to Rhode Island School of Design and got in. And it turned out we could take our classes at Brown, so our academic classes, and that's when I studied with C.D. Wright. and she turned me on to, I'm kind of nervous. How could I, for Jory Graham. And Jory Graham, reading Jory Graham's poems, I started to really think about just like, I don't really need to write poetry anymore. I just kind of need to experience life in this way and pay attention to life in this way and kind of have life be this poetic experience. And so, you know, at the time, I think I was just kind of, you know, taking in things and, you know, sort of sitting back and not really writing or anything, but started to make photographs around that.
Well,
And
there's something just related to that in your photography and life and poetry. There's something that strikes me about the tempo of your work is related to poetry and the flow. So it's interesting to know that you were starting to explore poetry and photography simultaneously, and that you then maybe switched over to photography, but the poetry manifested itself maybe physically.
yeah, I was seeing like how certain things would just take on, you know, like they would kind of switch up whatever experiences I was having, and, you know, and I think it was around 2008 maybe, I think that's when Jory Graham's Sea Change came out. And before that I was camping out though in the Outer Banks. Like when I started teaching at Mason, when summertime would come around, I would pack up the car, as my friend Trish knows, and just say, I gotta go camp for a while on the beach by myself. And so a friend of mine would come down, Vicki Crahon, and we would, you know, camp out together for a while. And one time there was a hurricane that was coming through, like the tail end of a hurricane, and I remember like taking the tent and, you know, kind of really ridiculously thinking that I could somehow save this tent in these really strong winds, because it wasn't like, I think it was just kind of the last bit of the wind. And that's when I like stuffed it into a ball, like down into the sand. And the whole time I was thinking, you know, I should really have a video camera of this performance. So, and I think that's where like all this stuff grew out of, was that experience.
So did you meet the gentleman who gave you the sail on that same trip, or was that?
No, that was down at the Atlantic Center for the Arts. So basically, my friend Vicki and I had taken a few road trips, and we ended up in Galveston, Texas, like a year after Ike had come through, and we were just driving around, and I looked over and I saw all these wrecked sailboats, and I was like, oh, you know, we need photographs of that. And so, of course, both of us being photographers, we supported each other in our works, and I photographed that sail ship over there, and I started thinking about that, and I was like, you know, the tent, the sailboat without a sail, and, you know, it was like this kind of shelter, and it was transportation, but what's a sailboat without a sail? And that was all kind of nebulous questions. And so by the time I had gotten to the residency in New Smyrna Beach at the Atlantic Center with Wrbican Dykstra, who was amazing, she was like, why aren't you making your portraiture? And I was like, I don't know, I'm obsessed with sails now. And she was like,
Right, so you started out doing portraiture.
Yeah.
There were always figures in your work.
Yeah, that was when I was in Pittsburgh, and just I would work, I would go along with a photographer named Charlie Brodsky, who I was doing independent studies with at the time, and she was photographing Homestead, PA, which was like totally devastated by the steel industry pulling out of Pittsburgh, and she just was like, okay, get your view camera, we're going, and I'm like, I don't even know how to work this thing. And she's like, well, I'll see you back here in 2 hours. And I'd be like, okay. So basically she just kind of threw me into the fire, and I would walk around with this giant view camera and just meet people, and we would talk, and I would do their portrait, and I loved that whole like experience of meeting people and talking to them about whatever. Of course, they were really curious about the camera. I have to say that was quite a device. But you know, I think after RISD, I mean, there was a lot of things. I worked with one of the professors, Deborah Bright, was very much about representation and feminism, and she, you know, she questioned what I was doing, and you know, and I thought about the power of the camera and everything, and so I kind of wanted to pull away from that, and I did a lot of work that was really about my family, because I had found all these old photographs that my father had taken, and so I was working with that material while I was at grad school. But anyway, that's kind of a big digression.
Well, I don't know that it is, because I think probably you're working with people in front of the camera. There seems to be some connection that knowing how to talk to people and that relationship, people are not absent from this work. There are a lot of relationships behind it. And you keep, you know, every time we've talked about it, you want to acknowledge that your first sale was a gift and it came through these conversations with people. And you've collaborated with the acrobat when you were down on Captiva Island. And your book is a biography. So I think that these people and people in general are still very present in the work.
Yeah, well, it's so much of what I think, you know, this kind of work, it makes you want to collaborate with people and pull people in just because it's fun. And you want to share the experience. And it's like, you know, you have like such interesting bonds when you work with another artist. And, you know, you take it to a place that you didn't expect. And that I think is really also very important to the work.
So you kind of follow your leads. You found this sailboat and the sails, and you're a photographer, but you started really making sculptures.
Yeah, well, you know, I think for me the sculptures were things that I could photograph, and I would have these ideas in my mind about something. Particularly, I was looking at the paintings of Kay Sage, and I would look at her desolate landscapes, and I would think, gosh, you know, this whole thing about materiality and, you know, the 2D painting, right, becoming like this 3D object, and you know, I felt like her paintings had so much to do with this very desolate future and stuff, which I found interesting. And, you know, just kind of working with the idea of hurricanes and destruction and stuff. And also, you know, seeing her paintings that had these, like, obvious, like, very sail-like, you know, pieces in them, and thinking about, wow, she's a painter, she can do anything. I'm a photographer and I need to photograph that thing. How am I going to do it? Well, I guess I'm going to have to build it. So that's where and then the maquettes started to come out of that. Like even, well, actually with the sails down in New Smyrna, because I wanted to turn the sail into a shelter. And I thought, you know, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to have to cut up this incredible sail that had all these histories in it. And I thought, well, maybe there's a way that I can turn the sail into an object with, you know, that looked like shelter based on the wind, which wasn't the greatest idea. But I was like, well, what might that look like? So that's when I started doing those paper maquettes. And I was like, maybe it'll look like this. And then I was photographing them, and Wrbican was like, what are you doing? She's like, where are those portraits? I'm like, I'll take a portrait of the guy that gave you the sail, okay? So anyway, yeah, I think that's where the maquettes started to come in, and then I would photograph the maquettes, and then I would see like, oh, well, these can be the subjects of photographs too, and you know, and then I would go through all these activities, like I made a little instruction book for friends.
Uh-huh.
And I would be, well, let's go to the beach this weekend and see if you can make this sail look like this little paper maquette. And of course, it wasn't gonna work, but we still had this really wonderful time together, and I would just kind of let all that be in the work. Because I felt like really strongly about the people that I was with, you know, and that they were artists, you know, and it was like they wanted to be in this process too somehow, and I really enjoyed that. And so, and then, you know, I guess it was the Zizek conference, and that was about parallax. And there's this idea that if you take something out of it at one environment and you put it into another environment, it takes on a new meaning. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And so I thought, well, what would happen if one of Kay Sage's sculptures, what they weren't her sculptures, but one of her representations would be in a postmodern building, which was where the conference was. So I did that, and that's, you know, so I built this little like toothpick sculpture and gave it to my students, and they were like, yeah, we can figure that out. We're gonna go and get some bamboo, and we're gonna make this thing. And they were all excited about going to the philosophy conference.
Okay.
They loved that. And we had a great time. We learned all about dark ecology and stuff like that. And yeah, it was a real like mind-opening experience, and that was very, very special to be able to share that with the students, and also some colleagues came as well. And we all just sort of went down there and got an Airbnb and put up our bamboo thing and had a good time.
And how long was that at?
I was only up for a weekend, but we rented one of those big rider trucks, and my friend Mia Boyer, she was like, I'm gonna drive this thing. I've drove these before, I'm gonna drive this, so she drove it. That was so much fun, yeah, so anyway.
So the process, the journey, that's all part of the work.
Yeah, well, in the book, and in this
right,
piece
so,
it is. I don't know if it's gonna be in everything, but it,
well,
yeah.
the frozen car was a
Yeah,
trip, and
yeah, the
floating
frozen car,
lab has a
definitely. Well, I think a lot of like the collaboration that I was doing with Mary Carruthers, we had done other things too. We had done this project about, I don't know, we were both from Western Pennsylvania, and we, you know, we often see like you would have to like burn some things in the fields to kind of, you know, get rid of the weeds and stuff, and a lot of times people would use pieces of burning tires. And so that you'd just like flip them around, there's a terrible, horrible smell, and so we got a grant to do a project at this place, SEPA Gallery in Buffalo, and we thought, well, maybe we can make like little fireplaces out of getting tires, and we put videos in there of like all these crazy adventures that we were doing in this Airstream trailer. And so we did that project in Buffalo, and then we collaborated again on a piece called The Frozen Car, which was entirely different, and it was, we worked with a community on that up in Michigan. And that was at Michigan Technological Institute. And that's where we started to say, you know what, we should be blogging about this. So like the narrative would come, like every day we would write a little piece in there and have a photograph of what we'd done. And we had no idea where that was going. And I loved that. I was like, this is so great. I really love when we don't know where it's going. And so I just kept doing that.
So that kind of leads to this and the idea of surrealism, and the agenda was to have no agenda and just see where things ended up. And, you know, I don't think you were ever imagining this project as an exhibition from when we started talking. That really, you had decided to present the project as a book, which we should also mention we're here today with the books. They're finally realized. You've been sewing away. An edition of 50 artist books.
Yeah, so, and they're covered with the sale, one of the sales, um, someone, at a place in Annapolis, his name is John Bolano, he gave me, after he had seen what I'd done with this first sale, which he actually stitched in like this channel around the edges so that I could bend it and stuff.
And
I
that
sent him.
sale is here, right?
No, it's
Oh,
not actually,
Oh.
no. That one, it's just too it has some, yeah, there's like differences about it that probably wouldn't work. But, so anyway, he had seen that, and I made him a print and sent him that. And he called me or Facebooked or something and said, hey, do you want some more sales? I have to get rid of sales. And I was like, yes, I want them. I don't know why, but I want them. And so he told me the whole history of each sale, and that was amazing. And one of the sales he gave me was already cut in half and, you know, split up, and so that was a sale that I took up to the Seligman Center in New York, and we just used that as a drop cloth to paint the sculpture. And so all the books are covered with that sale, and that's why they're all so different, because they have all these paint splotches on them and everything that come from painting the sculpture. And that was really interesting. So that was like a whole other thing that came out of this thing, and just like the overlap and following this whole trajectory of how these weather and sales and everything led me to K-Sage. And so when I was visiting the Seligman Center before all that happened with a friend of mine, Julie Martin, who she was married to Billy Kluver, and they were really instrumental in collaboration with artists and engineers, and started a foundation or an institute with Rauschenberg in the 60s. And Billy Kluver was an engineer at Bell Labs, and he passed away in 2004. And I've since stayed very close to Julie, and so one day she said, look, let's go up to this place. They're trying to start an art center here. I just want you to see it. So we drove up on this beautiful fall day, and it was, you know, it's like up the Hudson River, maybe a half an hour from Dia. And there was somebody there, and he had seen the piece that I did at the conference, and he said, well, maybe you could build that here on the property, which is like 50 acres. And I was like, well, yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to do that. I want to do some research about this. And so, you know, as I'm researching more and more, it's like Kurt Seligman was a surrealist painter. He was part of Andre Breton's circle. He wrote The Mirror of Magic, and actually Breton kicked him out of the Surrealists because they had a disagreement about the meaning of a tarot card, which was the Fool. And so I was like, Surrealist, K-Sage, you know.
Any connection?
And it turned out that K-Sage actually used to visit the property, and we're very good friends of the Seligmans, and I was like, okay, whoa, all right.
The Seligmans kind of cared for her at moments in her life. Is that, from what I've read?
I don't know about that history, but
they were
it
very
makes sense.
close friends, and Sage was married to Yves Tanguy, who was a difficult person, to say the least, but she was very dedicated. And from what I've read, the Seligmans really supported her through difficult times with him and after his death. And she went blind in the end.
Yes, she did, and that's, she, if you read like some of the things that she was writing, all she could do was scream, she said, because she couldn't paint anymore. And you know, we as artists, I think, you know, if we think about, you know, not being able to make our work anymore, yeah, that's, I understand that scream. And yeah, and she committed suicide. You know, and I think that was one of the things that so much fascinated me about her was that nobody would respond when I would talk about Kay Sage. But the minute that I would say Yves Tanguy, they'd be like, oh, yeah. I was like, okay, here we go again. So, you know, I really wanted to kind of stay with that. I thought that was a really important narrative that just keeps repeating itself time and time again. And I think that, you know, I think there's so many women artists now who are working very hard to change that kind of perception.
To not be the wife of, but
Yes.
be an artist.
Yes.
Well, can I ask about the title of the book? The biography, well, it's biography of a catastrophe
Yes.
and the eventual outcome of an instinct.
It's a tongue
It
twister.
is.
It was kind of a brain twister to come up with that. But I was thinking about the work and it being like, you know, around these ideas of catastrophe and everything. And I was reading Rebecca Solnit, and she actually says in, I can't remember the name of the book, Paradise Built in Hell, the catastrophe is a Greek word.
I
And
have the quote here thinking it might come up.
okay, okay, so thank you.
Uh-huh.
So she says, catastrophe comes from the Greek word kata, or down, and stryphen, or turning over. It means an upset of what is expected, and was originally used to mean a plot twist. To emerge into the unexpected is not always terrible. And so I was like, yeah, that, you know, like it can mean this kind of thing. It was kind of grounded. Well, you know, Jory Graham, a book Sea Change that I was reading, like, you know, every few lines something would change, and then reading that and just sort of practicing in that mode of like allowing all these things to be very malleable, the experiences, like the inclusion of what to keep and what not to keep. And it was like a life and biography, and I was like, yeah, okay, I like that, that's different. And then of course I would Google it and make sure nobody else had done it. And then the eventual outcome of an instant, that was the project that I did at the Seligman Center, and that was based on a title of one of Kay's paintings. She had the greatest titles for her paintings.
Well, she was a poet as well.
She was a poet as well, and they have her poetry in the archives. And so, you know, I was going through some things, and but her paintings, really, the titles of her paintings were like, they were just so surreal. And so one of the paintings is called The Instant. And I was like, yes, that is a great title. And so as I was talking to Olivia Baldwin, who was the director there at the Seligman Center, because we had a lot of conversations, and you know, like, they have to have a lot of faith in an artist, I think, who doesn't have a grand plan. Just like, well,